Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Thanks for joining us. Well, yesterday there was no Facebook, no Instagram, no WhatsApp for nearly 7 hours. The global crash cut off more than 1 billion people from their favorite applications. Were user accounts compromised? Well, the tech giant is saying no.
Well, today it's scrambling to reassure users and put its systems back together. Meanwhile, a whistleblower appearing before the Senate today says Facebook intentionally stokes division, spreads misinformation, and harms young users for profit. Jenna Browder has more from Washington.
Facebook executives are apologizing and putting back together the pieces after a 7-hour shortage left more than 1 billion users without access to Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp.
The company blaming the blackout on configuration changes to key routers that communicate between systems. Founder and CEO Mark Zuckerberg posting this apology last night. "Sorry for the disruption. I know how much you rely on our services to stay connected with the people you care about." On Wall Street, the company's stock falling 5% in just a few hours. The crippling outage could cost Facebook more than $70 million, and Zuckerberg personally lost more than $6 billion. The incident highlights Facebook's ginormous power and comes as lawmakers scrutinize it. Today, a former Facebook employee will appear before a Senate subcommittee after coming out in the media this weekend.
The version of Facebook that exists today is tearing our societies apart.
Frances Haugen revealing her identity on 60 Minutes Sunday. The former Facebook manager turned whistleblower worked at the company for 2 years, but left this spring after her civic integrity unit was disbanded following the 2020 election. She shared thousands of pages of internal Facebook research with Congress that she says shows the social media giant knowingly stokes division, spreads misinformation, and hurts young users for its own profit.
Facebook has realized that if they change the algorithm to be safer, people will spend less time on the site, they'll click on less ads, they'll make less money.
Haugen says Facebook put some safeguards in place leading up to the 2020 election, but reverted back to prioritize growth over safety. Facebook pushing back hard after that 60 Minutes interview. Every day our teams have to balance protecting the ability of billions of people to express themselves openly with the need to keep our platform a safe and positive place.
This whistleblower is one gutsy, smart, strong woman.
And Haugen's testimony in Monday's outage have not been linked. Facebook says no user data was compromised in the disruption. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Well, it's not new. You go back in history to Cambridge Analytica, and it's kind of interesting to call it history. But it's quite clear Facebook understands the power of the platform. It's also quite clear that they've hired psychologists and sociologists to figure out how you and I use the platform, and then what is going to convince us to use that platform even more. In highly charged political seasons, they actually are making money on how much we're engaged and how outraged we are. And so are they going to tamp that down? The answer is no. It's making them money. The more they can stoke and fuel the argument, then the more you and I are going to use it. The counter to that is, though, if they try to tamp it down, at what point are they infringing on free speech? They're not a government, so the First Amendment doesn't apply to them, but their users would get outraged at them if they aren't allowed to freely express their opinion. This is going to be an ongoing debate. I don't see a way forward because I don't see the divided Congress coming up with any kind of regulation on any of the tech giants. So you and I are going to have to do it on our own. And in doing it on our own, do we understand when our emotional hot buttons are being pressed by social media? When we start becoming self-aware that we're being used, that's when we get the advantage. Well, in other news, for 2 consecutive months this summer, Border Patrol agents apprehended more than 200,000 people trying to enter our country illegally. So what's behind the surge? John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
Thanks, Gordon. In September, the Biden administration's push to remove Haitian refugees from the Texas town of Del Rio sparked a fresh crisis on the southern border. Now, a new warning is emerging over another significant surge of migrants in Central and South America heading north. Gary Lane has the story.
Thousands of Haitian migrants who once gathered under the bridge in Del Rio, Texas, are now in the United States. And another massive wave, as many as 400,000, may be coming. Appearing on the CBN News program The Global Lane, former acting Secretary of Homeland Security Chad Wolf explains why.
They're incentivized because of the success of those Haitians in Del Rio getting across and now into American communities. So they see that it can be successful. I think it's the Biden administration's job right now to break up those caravans, and they need to do that by working with Mexican officials and others. But they also need to do that by not only the messaging, but the policies they put in place.
An appeals court recently ruled the Biden administration can continue deporting migrant families trying to cross the U.S.-Mexico border under a COVID-19 pandemic rule. Known as Title 42, the Trump administration issued the order in March 2020 to slow the spread of the virus. Wolf says with tens of thousands more on the way, the U.S. Border Patrol will have insufficient personnel to process the migrants. The federal vaccine mandate may cause many agents to lose their jobs if they don't get vaccinated.
The administration, the Biden administration, certainly has a double standard here that doesn't make a lot of sense to most Americans. You have law enforcement officers that are dealing with these migrants and coming into contact with these migrants every day. The migrants have a choice on whether or not to take the vaccine, but the Border Patrol and law enforcement don't.
We've seen meth and fentanyl seizures at the border increase dramatically this year. So how concerned are you about gangs trafficking drugs and even humans?
When you have 15,000 folks under that bridge in Del Rio, it takes an immense amount of Border Patrol time and attention to care for and to process those individuals. And that's time that you don't have Border Patrol on the line, on that international border, making sure that you're not only keeping migrants out, but you're keeping illegal narcotics and other contraband out. And so when you have something like Del Rio, it just sucks up all the resources.
Immigration concerns go well beyond the southern border. Many Afghan refugees brought to the U.S. are being vetted after they arrive. And at least 700 reportedly have left their housing at U.S. military bases without completing their processing.
We're doing it when they're already here in the country versus doing it overseas at a safe third country. So I've got some real concerns about the manner and the speed of which they're trying to do these background checks. The system's not designed to do it in the manner in which they want it to be done. We're going to miss things, and it only takes one or two bad individuals to have something significant happen here in the homeland.
Gary Lane, CBN News.
Thanks, Gary. Turning overseas, where China is ratcheting up tensions with Taiwan in recent days, sending more than 100 warplanes on flights violating the island's airspace. CBN's Brody Carter reports on the White House response and what this show of strength could mean for the region.
As Taiwan strives to maintain its independence, China is flexing its military muscle over the island with an implied ultimatum: war or loss of sovereignty. More than 145 Chinese military warplanes tested Taiwan's air defense over a 4-day span in a year full of provocative military posturing.
Well, we remain concerned by the People's Republic of China's provocative military activity near Taiwan, which is destabilizing, risks miscalculations, and undermines regional peace and stability.
The intimidation resumed Friday, October 1st, also the 72nd anniversary of China's communist state. Monday, we saw its largest incursion yet, flying 52 military aircraft across the Taiwan Strait.
We know that China is testing the Biden administration because after the fall of Afghanistan, they said they were going to go after Taiwan and that the U.S. wasn't going to do anything about it. And I think that's actually what leaders in Beijing think. So this is an exceedingly dangerous situation.
While analysts say it's not an imminent threat of war, earlier this year, the communist government pledged complete reunification with Taiwan, viewing it as a breakaway province that must be taken back. Taiwan's defense ministry rebuked the incursions, calling them brutal and barbaric, while the U.S. State Department called for the aggression to stop, saying, quote, "We urge Beijing to cease its military, diplomatic, and economic pressure and coercion against Taiwan."
We have a policy called strategic ambiguity, which means we don't tell anyone what we're going to do. That policy worked in a more peaceful time. It's not working now, which means we need to go to a policy of strategic clarity, telling China, we will defend Taiwan.
As tensions rise in the South Pacific, President Biden's alliance with Britain, Australia, and Japan is working to share defense resources and supply Australia with nuclear-powered submarines to ensure a stronger, long-term military presence in the region.
Our commitment to Taiwan is rock solid and contributes to the maintenance of peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait and within the region.
The timing of China's forceful showing also comes while a strong NATO presence is patrolling nearby. It includes more than a dozen U.S., British, and Allied warships, including 3 aircraft carriers. Some see this not only as a message to Taiwan, but other world powers as well. Brody Carter, CBN News.
All right, thank you, Brody. Gordon, back to you.
Well, if you don't think Taiwan's important, let me talk about one little company. It's called Taiwan Semiconductor. If there's a shooting war between China and Taiwan, the Republic of China is what I ought to call it, because that's how they call themselves, it would absolutely cripple. If you think there's a shortage of chips today, if there's a shooting war with Taiwan, all of that production goes away. And it would be catastrophic for all the tech for all the world. Now, you add to it, because it's a shooting war with China, all the tech currently being produced in China goes away, too. Well, now suddenly things get to be very serious. And you can kind of forget about your retirement funds. You can forget about the stock market. You can forget about the world economy. All of those would be thrown into the tank literally overnight. So this is unbelievably important and unbelievably strategic. For decades, Taiwan, Republic of China, has been an ally with the United States in Asia. They're a shining example of democracy in the region. They have had free and open elections for decades. They have the freedoms that you and I enjoy in terms of freedom of speech, of assembly. They are a great example. But we need to pay attention to some of the warnings that have been issued. I'll go back to Lee Kuan Yew, who was the Prime Minister of Singapore way back in 2013. He warned that the West does not understand the resolve of President Xi, that the current president of China. We do not understand his background. We do not understand his strength of will. And unless we start to understand that and get rid of this strategic ambiguity and start getting very clear with him, if you invade, we will defend. Without that, he's going to view it as weakness. And the withdrawal from Afghanistan will be a signal for him. And when you look at our current political situation, when you look at how we're dealing with all the domestic issues in our countries, the riots that occurred over the summer, the insurrection that occurred on January 6th. You look at these things, and is our democracy strong? Do we have resolve as a people? And I think when you look at the withdrawal from Afghanistan, you could easily see how Beijing could get the wrong message that we would not stand with Taiwan. It's now time for our State Department and our president to be quite clear as to what we will do. This is more than let's send aircraft carriers and create NATO alliances and work with England and Australia. There needs to be a broad regional alliance in Asia, and it needs to be very clear that America views Taiwan as a strategic partner. Until that clarity comes, we're going to continue to see this kind of belligerent action from China.